The morning of October 12, 2023, began like any other in the quiet suburb of Naperville, Illinois. Margaret and Robert Finley had settled into a routine after 2 decades of living with their unending grief. It had been exactly 20 years since their only son, Daniel, disappeared without a trace on his way home from Naperville Central High School. Robert, now 68, was preparing coffee in the kitchen when he heard the doorbell ring. Margaret, 65, called from the living room, "I'll get it." Opening the front door, she found no one there, just a medium-sized brown package on the doorstep. The return address was unfamiliar P.O. Box 1546, Tucson, Arizona. "Robert," she called, her voice trembling slightly, "there's a package here." Robert joined her at the door, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Were you expecting something?" Margaret shook her head, carefully picking up the package. It wasn't heavy, perhaps 2 pounds at most. They brought it inside and placed it on their kitchen table, the same table where Daniel had eaten breakfast the morning he disappeared, October 12, 2003. "Should we open it?" Margaret asked, her fingers trailing over the brown paper wrapping. 20 years of false hopes and dead ends had taught them to be cautious. Detective Laura Simmons from the Naperville Police Department had retired 5 years ago, but her warning still echoed in their minds. Be careful with unexpected information. It could be someone cruel playing games. Robert examined the handwritten address more closely. The handwriting, it's not familiar. He reached for the scissors from the drawer and carefully cut along the edge of the packaging. Inside was a plain white box. Robert lifted the lid, and they both gasped. On top was a faded red baseball cap, Daniel's lucky Chicago Cubs hat, the one he had been wearing the day he disappeared. The hat his teammates from the Naperville Central baseball team had searched for in the days following his disappearance, thinking he would never leave it behind willingly. "Oh my God," Margaret whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "Robert, that's his." Robert's hands shook as he lifted the hat. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope and what appeared to be an old leather journal. Margaret reached for the envelope with trembling fingers, tearing it open to find a single handwritten note. "Mr. and Mrs. Finley, I can no longer keep this secret. Daniel deserves justice, and you deserve the truth. The journal will explain everything. I'm sorry it took me 20 years to find the courage. I was there that day." The Finleys looked at each other, 2 decades of anguish suspended in a moment of terrified hope. Robert reached for the phone. "I'm calling Detective Harris," he said, referring to the young detective who had taken over Daniel's cold case 3 years ago. "And then I'm calling Sarah." Sarah Klein had been Daniel's girlfriend at the time of his disappearance. She had never given up on finding out what happened and now worked as a journalist for the Chicago Tribune. Margaret nodded, her eyes fixed on the journal that promised to finally answer the question that had haunted them for 20 years. What happened to their 17-year-old son on that ordinary autumn afternoon in 2003? Detective Karen Harris arrived at the Finley home within 40 minutes. At 42, she had developed a reputation in DuPage County for her tenacity with cold cases. The Naperville Police Department had assigned her Daniel's case in 2020, and though she had made more progress than her predecessors, definitive answers remained elusive. "Don't touch anything else," she instructed, pulling on latex gloves as she examined the package contents spread carefully on the kitchen table. This could be crucial evidence. Sarah Klein arrived shortly after, still wearing her press badge from the Tribune. Now 37, she had channeled her grief into investigative journalism, specializing in missing persons cases. Her relationship with the Finleys had evolved from their son's high school girlfriend to something like a daughter. "Is it really his?" she asked, her eyes fixed on the Cubs hat. "It appears to be," Detective Harris confirmed. The fading pattern and that distinctive tear near the brim matched the description in the original report. Robert explained how they had received the package that morning. The note says the sender was there that day. Detective Harris carefully opened the journal, examining the first page. "The entries begin in September 2003, she noted, about a month before Daniel disappeared. The group gathered around the kitchen table as Detective Harris read the first entry aloud. September 15th, 2003. Coach put Daniel Finley and me on the same training schedule today. The Golden Boy needs my help with his pitching form, apparently. Dad says I need to make varsity this year, or he'll pull me from baseball altogether. If Finley's the ticket to varsity, I guess I'll have to play nice." "That sounds like Jason Reynolds," Sarah said immediately. "He was the relief pitcher, always in Daniel's shadow. They had a complicated relationship." Detective Harris continued reading through selected entries, which documented a growing friendship between Daniel and the journal's author, despite initial jealousy. The entries revealed that Daniel had confided in Jason about his plans to turn down a baseball scholarship to pursue photography at Columbia College, Chicago, something he hadn't yet told his parents or even Sarah. Then came the entry dated October 12, 2003. Everything went wrong today. I never meant for any of this to happen. Daniel and I were practicing late at Knock Park after everyone left. He was helping me with my curveball. Then Coach's son showed up with the stuff. Daniel saw everything. He said he couldn't be part of it, that he was going to tell someone. Eddie panicked and pushed him. Daniel fell and hit his head on the dugout bench. There was so much blood. Eddie said he knew what to do, that his dad would fix everything. I was so scared. We carried him to Eddie's car. I've never seen anyone so pale. Eddie told me to go home, to forget everything I saw. Said his dad would make sure nobody ever found out. I took Daniel's hat. I don't know why. Maybe to remember him. Maybe as proof. I'm so sorry, Daniel. I'm so sorry. Margaret let out a sob, clutching Robert's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eddie Norris, Detective Harris said grimly. Coach Norris's son. He had several drug possession charges as an adult, but was a minor in 2003. The coach, Robert whispered in disbelief. Coach Norris was leading the search parties. He consoled us. Sarah's journalistic instincts kicked in. Coach Norris left Naperville suddenly in 2005. Took a position at a high school in Arizona. Tucson, Detective Harris confirmed, checking the return address on the package. The package came from Tucson. The final pages of the journal detailed Jason's growing guilt and his father's insistence that he remain silent. The last entry, dated just 1 week ago, read, I saw Coach Norris's obituary today. Lung cancer. With him gone, maybe the truth can finally come out. I can't live with this anymore. Daniel's parents deserve to know what happened to their son. Even if it means I go to prison, it's time. Detective Harris closed the journal carefully. I need to take all of this into evidence. And I need to make some calls to the Tucson Police Department immediately. As she stepped outside to make her calls, Margaret, Robert, and Sarah sat in stunned silence, processing the horrific truth that had been hidden for 20 years beneath a veneer of concerned searches and false sympathy. All this time, Margaret whispered, he was right there, pretending to help us find our boy. By evening, the Finley home had transformed into an unofficial command center. Detective Harris had contacted the Tucson Police Department, who had already located and brought in Jason Reynolds for questioning. Now 37, Jason had been living under his mother's maiden name in a small apartment on the outskirts of Tucson, working as a photography teacher at a local community college. They're holding him, but he's cooperating fully, Detective Harris explained to the Finleys and Sarah. He's confirmed everything in the journal and provided additional details. According to Jason's testimony, Coach Richard Norris and his son Eddie had been running a small-scale steroids distribution operation within the baseball team. Several players were using performance enhancers supplied by Eddie, with his father looking the other way. That afternoon at Knock Park, Daniel had stumbled upon Eddie delivering drugs to Jason and another player. Jason claims Daniel threatened to report them, not just to the school, but to the police, Detective Harris continued. There was an argument. Eddie pushed Daniel, who fell and suffered a severe head injury when he hit the concrete dugout bench. Sarah, who had been taking notes, looked up. Did they take him to a hospital? Detective Harris shook her head grimly. According to Jason, Eddie panicked and called his father. Coach Norris arrived within minutes and determined that Daniel was already dead. He told the boys he would take care of everything and ordered them to go home and say nothing. Robert stood suddenly, pacing the living room. And we trusted him. He stood in this very room and promised he wouldn't rest until Daniel was found. The Tucson PD has also brought in Edward Norris Jr. for questioning, Detective Harris added. He's working as a pharmaceutical sales representative now. Initially, he denied everything, but when confronted with Jason's journal and testimony, he started negotiating for a deal. What about Daniel? Margaret asked quietly, the question they had all been avoiding. Have they said what happened to him? Where he is? Detective Harris's expression softened. Eddie has revealed that his father transported Daniel's body to a remote area in the Kankakee River State Park. We've already dispatched search teams to the location he described. The night passed in a blur of phone calls, coffee, and intermittent tears. By dawn, more details had emerged. The Illinois State Police had secured a warrant to search a property in Morris, Illinois, previously owned by Richard Norris's brother. Ground-penetrating radar had detected an anomaly consistent with a grave. Around noon the next day, Detective Harris received the call they had been waiting for. She listened intently before thanking the caller and turning to face the Finleys. "They found him," she said softly. "The forensic team has recovered remains that match Daniel's description, including dental records. They found him buried on the private property, just as Eddie described." Margaret collapsed into Robert's arms, 20 years of uncertainty giving way to devastating confirmation. Sarah sat down heavily on the couch, her reporter's composure finally breaking as tears streamed down her face. "There's more," Detective Harris continued gently. "They found Daniel's camera buried with him. The memory card was still intact." The detective explained that the forensic team had been able to recover images from the camera. The final photos Daniel took were of Eddie Norris handling what appeared to be steroids in the dugout at Knock Park, evidence that would have exposed the entire operation. "He was trying to do the right thing," Robert said through tears. That's who he was. As the day progressed, the news began to spread throughout Naperville. Former classmates, teammates, and neighbors gathered outside the Finley home, laying flowers and baseball caps on the front lawn in a spontaneous memorial. By nightfall, both Jason Reynolds and Eddie Norris had been formally charged, Jason with accessory after the fact and Eddie with manslaughter. The prosecutor's office was reviewing evidence to determine if more serious charges could be filed, though the 20-year gap complicated matters legally. For the Finleys, the legal process was secondary to a more immediate concern, bringing their son home at last. The memorial service for Daniel Finley was held on October 30th, 2023, at Naperville Central High School's baseball field. More than 500 people attended, including former teammates, classmates who had graduated 2 decades ago, and current students who had grown up hearing about the local boy who vanished. The Naperville Central baseball team had retired Daniel's number 17, and a permanent memorial plaque now hung in the dugout where he had spent so many afternoons perfecting his pitching technique. The plaque featured one of the photographs recovered from Daniel's camera, a stunning sunset over the baseball field, capturing a moment of perfect peace. Margaret stood at the podium, Robert by her side, addressing the gathered crowd. "For 20 years, we lived in that terrible space between hope and grief," she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "We imagined 1,000 different scenarios. We searched every face in every crowd, wondering if somehow, somewhere, our boy was still out there." She paused, looking down at the urn that held Daniel's remains. "The truth is painful, but it is also a relief. Daniel isn't coming home the way we prayed he would, but he is home nonetheless. And now, finally, so are we." The case against Eddie Norris and Jason Reynolds continued to develop. The district attorney had decided to charge Eddie with second-degree murder rather than manslaughter, arguing that his actions showed a depraved indifference to human life. Jason, in exchange for his testimony, would likely face a lesser charge of accessory after the fact and concealment of a death. Richard Norris's reputation in Naperville had been destroyed posthumously. The school board voted unanimously to remove all references to him from the school's athletic facilities, including a coaching award that had carried his name. Additional investigations revealed that his steroid distribution network had extended beyond Naperville Central to at least 2 other high schools in the district. Sarah Klein's 5-part investigative series on the case for the Chicago Tribune won national attention. Titled The Silence of the Dugout, it examined not only Daniel's case, but the broader culture of silence that had allowed Coach Norris's actions to go unchallenged for years. 1 week after the memorial service, Detective Harris visited the Finleys with a small evidence bag. "The prosecutor's office has released Daniel's personal effects," she explained, handing the bag to Margaret. "His camera, wallet, and the watch you gave him for his 17th birthday." Margaret cradled the items gently. "Thank you for everything you've done, Detective." After Harris left, Robert and Margaret sat together on their back porch, the same porch where they had waited countless nights for a son who never came home. "I've been thinking," Robert said slowly, "about the photography scholarship Daniel wanted to pursue." Margaret nodded, turning Daniel's camera over in her hands. "Columbia College, Chicago. I think we should establish a scholarship in his name. For young photographers. Something good should come from all this." The following spring, the Daniel Finley Memorial Scholarship awarded its first recipient, a talented young photographer from Naperville Central, who captured not just images, but stories with his lens. The winning portfolio included a powerful black and white series documenting the temporary memorial that had appeared outside the Finley home. Baseball caps, flowers, and notes from a community that had never forgotten one of its own. On what would have been Daniel's 38th birthday, Margaret and Robert finally placed a proper headstone in Naperville Cemetery. The epitaph, chosen after much deliberation, read simply, Daniel James Finley, 1986 to 2003. Beloved son and friend. The truth was always worth fighting for. As they stood beside the grave, Margaret reached for Robert's hand. 20 years, she whispered, but he's home now. Robert nodded, looking up at the clear blue Illinois sky. And so are we. In the Naperville Public Library's local history section, a special collection now houses the journal that revealed the truth, alongside copies of Sarah's articles and a book of Daniel's recovered photographs. The collection serves as both memorial and warning, a reminder that secrets, no matter how deeply buried, eventually find their way to the light. And in the Finley home, Daniel's red Cubs hat sits in a glass display case in the living room, no longer a painful reminder of absence, but a symbol of a 2-decade journey from loss to truth and finally to a measure of peace.